9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station. Atlantis now on the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier.
Hey, well, I am super excited to be with you all today for a seminar series that I call How to Use Storytelling, or The Power of Storytelling. The last time I gave this, it was to about 50 city leaders in our community, all of the people who are running all of the departments, because cities get a bad rap. And certainly when you add politics into things, many times it's how you tell your story, not necessarily what you say, but how you unfold that story, which really leads to some significant influence or perhaps negativity in the community. Now, this is important, I think, also for business, because storytelling is really the oldest way of communicating in the world. Long before people were writing things down and you and I were communicating here on the internet, people were using stories from one generation to the next. In fact, I talked with Bobby Herrera, who runs Populous Group. It's a very large staffing firm, and he was on my podcast, What Works. And he talked about storytelling being so important in his organization because everybody in the organization needed to be able to tell the story of the organization. How did Populous Group become what it is today? And perhaps the idea of even totems, things that have meaning. Can people in your organization tell others what the meaning of something is? Because it is those collective stories which actually create the power uh, and the foundation for your organization. So today we're going to talk about storytelling and some, I think, some ways to use that because, again, it is really the oldest method of communication. And I like to talk about this beginning with my daughter. This is my daughter when she was pretty young, eating a a cupcake, and I'm curious, as you're uh, looking at my daughter Madeline here, what word comes to mind? What thought comes to mind as you look at this image? Some people think, "Hey, man, she's having fun." That in fact was from a birthday party, and long time ago, and this is probably a decade ago. And here's another picture of her. Curious what word comes to your mind when you're thinking of her in this circumstance, wearing a tinfoil hat. That actually was on vacation. And I think she was having a good time there. And then another picture here. What word comes to your mind uh, when you're thinking of my daughter? Naomi here says excitement. Yeah, absolutely. Excitement. Other words I've heard is, oh, she wants to have fun. Oh, she must be smart. There are so many things that you could think of when you're thinking of my daughter here, but the truth is none of you know her. Uh, you've you've not met her. The vast majority of people who are watching this video right now didn't even know I had a daughter until moments ago. My buddy here, TC, great hat. Yeah, absolutely. Great hat. But the truth is, my daughter could be a complete dope. She could not know her up from down. She could be an awful student. She could be mean. She could be contemptuous. Paul here is conspiratorial. and and the interesting thing I think about when I'm thinking of story is that story is automatic. Each of us builds a story from limited touch points. It is automatic, it is necessary, and it is based on our own experience. And in fact, just by evidence of this example here, none of you know my daughter really. Uh, you've written a story in your mind because you've seen other people, other children in similar circumstances, and you think, wow, excitement, wow, great hat, conspiratorial. You're writing an entire storyline for her life, perhaps, having only limited touch points. And that's so important to think about because if storytelling is automatic, it's necessary, and it's only based on our own experience, having limited touch points from the other person, why is story so important? And how does story function in our existence? And so I want to talk about this. There are a handful of ways that story helps us communicate. It really lets us listen to other people's stories and convey. We use story to learn about other people and places. Places we've never been. We watch a travel show, snippets, small touch points of a location or of people, and we write entire storylines about that. Stories allow us to express emotion, this idea of conspiratorial or excitement. Limited touch points, automatic, necessary, and only based on our own experience, allow us to express emotion. A story also allows us to be entertained and to make sense, really importantly, of things around us. See, we only make sense of our world based on the stories that we tell ourselves. And you've experienced this in your interpersonal communications as well, perhaps with a significant other. There are times, perhaps, when someone has said something and it's triggered you, and you're like, oh, like that's a new word nowadays, right? It's, oh, that triggered me. It's because of the story that we each write in our own heads, and that again is automatic. It is necessary to be able to make sense of the world around us, and to be transported to new worlds, or to dream or hope or be inspired. Now, if you're just joining us, I do want to let you know that this is a training. It's from our expert series on power of storytelling. You can find this. This will be available actually more in depth in a course in the Thinker Growth community that you can actually go online before we go any further and get that information. We also have a networking event tonight. I do want to put that out in front of you. And again, this is sponsored by the Thinker Growth community. I'm going to take just a couple seconds here to tell you another story, and I'll be back in about 20 seconds. So, story, we're talking about the power of storytelling. Story also enables us to make sense of the past. We need story. It is the story from our past which also connects us with the present. We've got the past, we've got the present, and then story also helps to inspire our futures. Story is, in fact, automatic, it is necessary, and it is based on our own experiences. And now, how do we use storytelling? Because story is such an automatic, necessary experience in our lives. It is the only way we make sense of circumstances. How do we use that? So let's talk about influence. Stories influence our beliefs, which drive our actions, which lead to our interactions, which write stories. Now, this is a really important series of events that I really want to call out here and spend some time dwelling in this. Stories influence our beliefs, which drive our actions, which lead to our interactions. And it's this cycle of experience which confirms for us that the story that was based on our own experience is now true again, or helps us rewrite stories so that we can take new understanding into the future. Now, here's the interesting thing: when we don't get an action that we want, many a times we attack the action, but we don't understand that it's actually the belief that leads to that action. We rarely unwind it to think about the story that influenced that belief. And if story is automatic, necessary, and based on our own experience, when people don't respond the way we want them to respond, we need to think about what story are they writing in their head. This is very important in intimate relationships. I think we've all experienced that. Hey, why did you say it that way? Why did you do that thing? Why didn't you do that thing? A person is believing a story which influences their action, which influences their interaction. This is true in business as well. A customer doesn't want to do business with us because they have a particular storyline they're writing. And in the absence of us telling the story, writing that story, they are bound to believe the story that is based on their own experience. It's the used car salesman thing. When's the last time you had a great experience with a used car salesman? I did. The last car I bought, a great guy. And yet I have a story in my mind from 2 decades ago when I bought one of my first cars, and I asked, "Hey, does that have, analog brakes?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, it's got analog brakes." And I didn't bother to check on it. I just believed the guy. And it turns out, no, in fact, it didn't. And that place that I bought it from at the time had a reputation for telling stories that weren't true, which then influenced my further belief. And for many of us, it influences our belief when we're going to do business with an organization. Now, here's the other thing: stories don't have to make factual sense. Stories influence our belief, which influences our action, which influences our interactions, which write our stories, and that cycle continues on and on and on. But in fact, entire storylines are written from very, very simple sayings. Here's an example. The early bird gets the worm. We each probably have a story where the early bird got the worm, something in our own life or something that we heard from someone else. The early bird gets the worm. We likely all believe that. And yet, good things come to those who wait. We likely believe that too. Each one of us has a story when waiting was the most appropriate thing. We believe two contradictory storylines. Which one is right? We have sayings about both of those. Story is automatic, it's necessary, and it is based on our own experience. We also have stories about brands. And this is super meaningful for us in business because if you're anything like me, you have experienced a plethora of people online talking to you about how they're going to do lead gen and they're going to do brand work and personal development and all this other stuff, which is all great, not knocking it at all. But when you ask, "Hey, what's different about that? What's different about the service that you do?" And they, "Hey, we get a lot of leads for you. We get 20 a month, and we're gonna help you work on your personal brand. We're gonna do some social media posts and all this other stuff. We do the same thing really as everybody else, but we think we're saying it differently, and we're not. Many times we're communicating the same exact thing, but large brands have this figured out. They know the storyline that they want to control, and with those limited touch points, they know that we're writing an automatic, necessary story that is based on our own experience. So let's talk about some of those experiences with brands. Walmart. What comes to mind when you think about Walmart? One of the one of the things that comes to my mind is, you know, that Walmart is always low prices, always. And I want to think about that for just a minute. Always low prices, always. It's not the lowest. They didn't say it. They didn't say it's the lowest, but they did say it's low prices, always. Now think about the opposite side of that story. Who has higher prices? Always everybody else. And like my friend here, Dan, low cost point. Absolutely. We have a storyline in our mind about Walmart because of the story they keep telling us. The story influences our belief. We believe they have low prices when? Always. When are the prices higher? Never, because it's the opposite of always. Always low prices, always. It is automatic, is necessary, and it is based on our own experience. You head into Walmart and you find a low price, you're like, yep, I guess they're right. Always low prices, always. And how about this one? Audi. This is an old saying that they had, actually, truth in engineering, which is an interesting one. And I'm curious, how many people have owned an Audi? I had an Audi for a decade or so, and hate to say it, but had significant electrical problems. And talked to a friend of mine who sold cars all the time. He said, "Yeah, absolutely, you should probably sell it after 2 or 3 years. It tends to have electrical problems." My dad's Audi also had electrical problems, and in fact, this truth in engineering thing is an ironic one because it was some time ago that they had an emissions issue where the car actually would change its change how it was mixing the oxygen, the air, and the fuel mixture, so as to pass the emissions test when the emissions stuff was connected in California, and then you took it off and it would go back into its normal performance mode. And so they had to actually remove that truth in engineering thing because the story and what people believed wasn't going to make sense. Story, belief, action, interaction. Here, the North Face. This is a great one. How many people have North Face gear? I know I've got a ton of North Face gear, and I'm just curious, how many people know what the North Face is? Because there's all sorts of people going to work every day from their home into their warm car to their warm office and back again. I'm in Northern Illinois. We're going to get 7 inches of snow today. We're going to put on our North Face gear, and it's going to be great. It is really great stuff. But you know why it's named the North Face? It's actually for the north face of the mountain. It's the most treacherous part of the mountain for those folks who climb mountains. North Face, a lot of people wanting to live adventurous lives who are going from their home to their office every day and back again. Or maybe now here we're in a post-COVID world. Maybe we're just staying home all day. North Face has a storyline that people believe, which drives our actions and interactions. Now, here's a funny one. Again, last time I gave this seminar, it was to a to a community of government officials. And so I had to poke fun at everybody's favorite, the DMV. When I showed this video last time, and I decided not to show it here since we're doing this online, but when I showed this video last time, uh, I I showed the video from, I think, the movie Pets, where the sloth is the person behind the DMV counter who's moving very slowly. The DMV has a certain storyline to it. We all carry, I think, maybe I'll speak for myself. I carry a belief that I'm going to go to the DMV and I'm going to feel like maybe I've interrupted someone's day, and and I might be there for a very long time. Uh, and it's so ubiquitous. That feeling is so ubiquitous that they put it in a movie that we all watch. Oh, so yeah, thank you, Naomi. It's Zootopia. Yes, great movie. Uh, so the conclusion is perhaps the DMV is slow, or people don't care, or people are going to just take their sweet time and they're not going to be happy with me. I might be a nuisance. Uh, which then I was thinking, how do you overcome this? if people's belief is you're slow, how much you overcome it and write a new story, you might just say the storyline faster than last time and do a whole ad campaign. Illinois DMV, faster than last time. How would you know? It's like saying always low prices, always. How would you know? You don't, but it sure would be a great story. Or here's another one that happened in our community. Uh, we have this issue with crosswalks, and this was actually happening in our area. The crosswalk was dug up one day with no warning. No one said that the sidewalk was going to be taken out. There was no communication, no communication to the neighbors, and it actually sat there for weeks. And in fact, all the neighbors were talking. They were mowing around the signs. They were wondering what's going to happen, and it's interesting that in the absence of someone telling the story of what's going to happen with that, people write usually a negative story, a worst case scenario. Rarely do people go right to the best case scenario and go, "Wow, this is going to be great when it's done. I think they're going to do something amazing." Again, we write a story, it's automatic, it's necessary to make sense of our world, and then it's based on our prior experience. And so something like this causes questions, and those questions demand answers. The sidewalk's been ripped out, there's days of dirt, there's no communication. The conclusion the person must come to is, I'd like to think my city cares and wants to fix things, but they don't know what's going on. And then, oh man, government doesn't seem to care about how this affects my life and my family and my stuff. And I feel like I'm paying the bill and things take unnecessarily too long. And does it really take this long to pour concrete? So the map of that story is with limited touch points and no further interaction. It leads us to filling in the gaps with questions and a story of frustration that I'm going to be unhappy. And we do this actually in our in many different areas. Paul talks about this. We did it all the time in the military. They wouldn't communicate clearly, so the rumor mill was a never-ending problem. I saw another great speaker years ago, and he talked about this idea that everyone craves drama. And if you don't give your organization something dramatic to think about, they will create the drama for them. If you got a lot of infighting in your organization, it's likely that you, as the leader, have not set a goal to shoot for, something to fight for, and something to fight against, because everybody needs drama. In your interpersonal relationships, we need something to fight for and we need something to fight against. And it's really no different for any of our brands either. What are we fighting for? And also, what are we fighting against? And if a person cuts you off in traffic, let's say, what's the storyline we write? It's usually a negative storyline. That person's a jerk. A limited touch point, but we have to explain it away. It's necessary, and it's based on all the other jerks who've ever cut us off in traffic before. But the truth is that with one additional touch point or with more information, we might find out that that person was taking their wife to the doctor with a baby that's on the way. Who knows? There's actually a couple thousand babies in the US born in transit to the hospital. If you could have happened in your area. But the story's automatic. It's necessary. It's based on your own experience. And if we don't write the story, somebody else is writing the story for us, and we don't want to do that. So let's talk about this. This is the map, and it's really important. You actually can catch this replay as we're going through this. You can catch this at the Thinker Growth community. You do get a year's worth of networking, training, and professional development. Join that at thinkergrowth.com. We actually have a number of different classes available as well. You can get replays, checklists, expert guidance, and peer support. You can become a founding member now. You'll save 60%. Or you can explore networking events for free. So back to story. Here's another way to think about this. From a psychological perspective, psychologists will talk about it in these types of terms. Thinking leads to our feelings, how we feel about a situation, which leads to our actions. There is a process of how we think about things, which lead to our feelings, which leads to our action. Psychologists say an antecedent, ABC. In behavior change, they'll talk about the antecedent, the way we think about something, which leads to our behavior, which leads to the consequences of that behavior. There are a handful of ways to think about this, but we are all making decisions and taking action today based on this same framework. So, story, it's automatic, it's necessary based on our previous experience, and it does drive our actions. How do we change the story for ourselves or for somebody else? There's a couple ways to do this. Now, one of the ways to think about this is that again, if you're not telling the story, your audience will. And we each have touch points in a chain of events when we are doing business with someone else. That chain of events could begin with perhaps this webinar. You're just experiencing this webinar, you're experiencing me. You're making judgment calls about whether I'm kind or whether I'm smart. And you are also then going to determine, hey, should I take action again? I've mentioned this idea of the thinker growth community, and we've got some branding up in the corner here. But you're thinking, hey, should I, is that worth it? What's my experience last time somebody talked about some growth community? The storyline that you're writing is automatic, it's necessary. It's based on your previous experience, but it's based on every touch point of our interactions. And this is true of your customer. We have the opportunity to address all the touch points. And the key is, what do we want someone to believe from those touch points? Because that person is looking for an explanation. And we must provide that, because without it, we not only lose immediate control of writing the story, we now need to unwrite the story that they created based on their prior experience. And that's important because we need to understand, if we're looking at influence, that people care about certain things. And this is true of every story. In theories of influence, you'll get into this idea that people care about safety, adventure, significance, relationships, health and wellness, success or a sense of purpose, and growth and education. These are the 7 core drivers of people's behavior: safety, adventure, significance, relationships, health and wellness, success or a sense of purpose, growth and education. And you can see it in the brand examples that we brought out earlier. The North Face, sense of adventure, a sense of health and wellness, a sense of perhaps growth. Man, I'm becoming more than I was yesterday. I'm becoming more adventurous. I'm becoming higher risk taking. Whatever it is that individual cares about. Or uh, Audi, truth and engineering, a sense of safety, a sense of significance. Walmart, perhaps, is, man, I'm taking care of myself because I've got low prices, which might lead to perhaps the feeling of financial safety, or a feeling of, I am taking care of my relationships better because I am being frugal. There's a storyline that somebody's writing, which is influencing their belief, which is creating their action and their interactions. That story influences belief. It's something really that we need to pay attention to. So, when we think about this again, the touch points, we need some sort of explanation, and those explanations that we give when we are writing stories and communicating these stories to people need to take into account the emotional drivers, because it is the emotion which is the conduit for the storyline. It's really, really important when we're looking at changing a story. To be able to disrupt that storyline, we need to disrupt it at the touch points with a new explanation, taking into account the emotional drivers. And that's why these details matter. Every touch point will either concentrate our story and build that belief or dilute our story and cause that person to believe perhaps the opposite of what we're trying to say. Because again, we're all writing stories that tend to be the most negative. So how do we put this new narrative on here? I'm going to use this example, and when we were advertising this, we talked about this new narrative. For to get a desired action, we needed to address the underlying belief, which is built on the touch points and experiences of our audience. I asked you to join this webinar because I wanted to tell you about Jen. Now, what's so important about Jen? Uh, Jen actually is a real person. Her name is not Jen, but she actually is a real person. I've changed the name to protect the innocent. But Jen is a designer, uh, and was a designer in downtown New York, and I've called her out in this because when we're thinking about affecting change with a new narrative, we have to figure out what people desire. What's the storyline the person is writing? And so here's the story of Jen. And this you will see is portable across community relationships in government, is portable across businesses and brand building, personal interactions with the people that we care about. So Jen and her husband, they want to move to a place where they can afford a home. So she was presented with some ideas for homes in our area. And she's moving from New York, and the cost of living here is significantly less. But Jen's question, this is so important. Jen's question actually was, are there any cute coffee shops in your area? Now, we'd have to extrapolate what cute might mean because again, with limited touch points, the thing that I think about a cute coffee shop might not be what she's thinking about when she thinks about a cute coffee shop. But it's very telling that even though the cost of living is much lower, the thing that she really cared about was, are there any cute coffee shops in your area? We'd need to think about, well, where do you go now? What's your prior experience? Because before I can tell you a new story that influences your belief and drives your new action, I need to know what the current story is that you believe. That's a real principle of negotiation. What does the other person want? You need to know because you can almost be certain that what the other person wants is not the same thing as what you want. So she has a vision. Jen has a vision for what she wants her life to be like. And part of that vision is going to a cute coffee shop. And based on those interactions, you could argue that that is more important to her than affording her house. And so it informs us really of the touch points that we might consider when we're talking about Jen and how she's gathering her information. By understanding that, we can actually disrupt her storyline. We can influence a new belief, which can lead to a new action. And assuming our interactions correlate with our belief, we might be able to change her living location. But changing a person's belief system on touch points they don't care about with emotional drivers they don't care about doesn't make a difference. And in fact, I heard a story about a large organization, and I'll get some of the details a little bit fuzzy on this, but the gist is this: that this large organization was going to make a big move, multi-million dollar move from one state to another state, and they had tax incentives and land available, and it was a shoe in economically, and the the city government, the county, the state were behind this. And at the last minute, the deal fell through and no one could understand why. These people who had spent months putting this deal together Financially, the company was going to save a couple $1,000,000 by doing this, and it seemed like a no-brainer, but why did they back out? And it turned out that this event, this what they call Black Swan event, was that the president of the company had really never disclosed that his wife didn't want to move. And she said, I'm not going to move there. I like it where I live now. Economically, it made sense. That touch point of economics, which everybody else was thinking about, was not the touch point that the decision maker cared about. When we want to influence behavior and use storytelling, we must consider the touch points that the audience cares about and how they are thinking about making their decision. This is vitally important. Back to that crosswalk. Eventually, a nice new crosswalk was put in, new paint and everything, but it was weeks late. And sure, everybody's happy about it, but how could they have done that better? They could have even the city could have even put around a flyer to the community, to all the homes. It would have cost almost nothing just to let them know, hey, you know what? You're going to be so excited because we are fixing the broken pavement. We are repaving that area. We're going to paint it, which is going to make it safer. Back to those emotional drivers, it's going to make it safer. The community is going to get better. You're going to feel like you're more successful because you're living in a nicer community. You're going to feel better about yourself. You might have a sense of purpose of why, man, I moved to this area because I knew it was great for the kids, and now they're safer when they're crossing the street. Any number of ways that that story could have been written differently would have made all of the difference. Or the DMV, who's the audience? What action might we want to take, and what do they care about? What do they want? What would the DMV perhaps want us to believe? It's really, really important that we take those things into account when we are building our brands, when we are building our businesses, because it is up to us to tell the story. So, some questions. What do people believe about your community, your business, your brand? What do people believe about you? And what are those touch points writing? Because people are watching. Next thing is, what do we want people to feel? Because again, it is out of our feelings that people make decisions. We all do it. It's automatic, it is necessary, and it is based on our own experience. Some further questions to consider when we're thinking about writing a story, knowing that the story follows a predictable path which leads us to action. If we're not experiencing the action that we are looking for, we need to go back to those touch points and the interactions which are writing the story. So, who is our audience and what do they care about? What story are they already writing? What action do we want our audience to take? What does our audience need to believe? This is key. What do they need to believe to be able to take that action? People will not act out of a belief that they don't have. And belief does not have to be based on facts. Back to some of our other examples. Always low prices, always. Okay, they're low, not the lowest, but everybody writes that story. Truth in engineering, not necessarily. Good car, sure, but they're not arguing that. They're looking at the other drivers of behavior, success and significance. What story can we craft to influence that belief? And when you join the growth community here, we actually deal with topics like this, and we'll help you along the way. There is weekly expert business building Q&A where we will work on these things with you. I want you to be successful. Another thing to consider is which touch points best engage my audience. Now, if you've been following along here on the webinars that I've been doing along with my colleagues Naomi and Paul and some others, we did a webinar series on writing a book, and one of the first questions I asked in that webinar is your audience consuming a book? If your audience is not consuming a book, well, then don't write a book. If you want to start a podcast, great. Is your audience consuming the podcast? Is that the touch point for your audience? Figure out what the touch points are for your audience, because it is at those touch points that you can change belief. You can change that pattern. You can interrupt the storyline for your audience. So, some important takeaways here as we're winding down into our handful of minutes. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And again, join the Thinker Growth community, because a year's worth of networking, training, and professional development is less than $200. It's available at thinkergrowth.com. The networking is totally free. Just join us for our networking events where you can meet new people. If you're working on a startup, you might be able to meet a co-founder. If you're working on, if you need new friends and deeper friendships and some professional connections, join the networking groups. You'll get expert guidance and peer support, and founding members do save 60%. Now, back to this, some important keys for story. And again, these are so important. The big brands know how to do this. Sometimes it takes a little bit of pausing and slowing down, but putting this stuff together will actually transform you and your small business, or you and your personal brand. Be concise. Say only what needs to be said. They there there are links in a chain. Somebody sees you at that first link and they figure out, do they want to continue to that second link? They're not they're not thinking all the way down the end of the line, 10 steps later, and all the negotiations that you're going to have. And I've got a cool thing I call the Thinker Business Map, which there's actually a course on that in the growth community. But we talk about how there's a predictable map that all businesses take. Anytime you get people together and you want them to take an action, there's a predictable map behind that. And some handful of keys on there. A handful of keys on there is: number one, be concise. There are links in a chain. Only say what's necessary to get them to the next link in the chain. Next is be relevant. Your examples should be audience focused. Again, this is a storyline that your audience is writing for themselves. It is automatic, it's necessary, it's based on their experience. Uh, a great example, this idea of, people start gyms because they like to work out. And that's a terrible reason to start a gym, because nobody cares that you like to work out. Everybody cares about themselves. They care about their own health. They do not care about yours. Real big difference in the way a person might communicate. What does your audience care about? Be concise, be relevant. A picture really is worth 1,000 words, good or bad. I started this whole thing talking about my daughter, a a cute, amazing, smart, talented girl. I know I'm biased, but she's all of those things. I gave you a handful of touch points and only told you the things I wanted you to hear, and you wrote your own storyline. You can actually take advantage of this idea that a story is automatic, necessary, and it's based on your own experience. If you leverage other people's experiences, this idea of shared experiences, leverage shared experiences, and you build on the momentum of what a person already wants. The vast majority of you want my daughter to be smart and healthy and fun. And, like my good friend Paul here talks, you want her to be conspiratorial. That's your story. It has nothing at all to do with any of the other touch points that you've never been involved in. But when we leverage that, we leverage the strength of someone else's story. A picture really is worth 1,000 words, good or bad. Tell stories and not calculations. There is an idea of thinking fast and slow, and it's really a good book. And there's been some additional research done on that. But the idea is that story follows an arc. Story follows a pattern. And if you've ever watched a really fantastic movie, a movie that you were really engaged in, after you watch that about 3, 4, 5 times, you're like, you see all these plot holes. And you're like, that's not. Why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they do that? Well, those details of the story, if they slowed down the storytelling, you would have seen those, and the whole story would have fallen apart. But story is based on a handful of touch points. Keep the arc of the story going. Don't get bogged down in the detail. Don't slow down a person's thinking when you're trying to get them to make a decision. And be as specific as possible. If it's 10 to 12 weeks, say it's 10 to 12 weeks. If you are writing a story about money or about numbers, people think in these big round numbers. Just give them the big round number. Hey, it's going to be less than $1,000. It's less than $200. It's less than $20 a month. The Thinker Growth community, where you can get trainings like this, is less than $20 a month. The vast majority of you spend more than that in your coffee every week. Less than $20 a month, professional and personal training from experts. The businesses I built have gone on to do over $100 million. I don't just show cute pictures about my daughter, even though she's amazing and I love her. There's a wealth of information that you can get from the Thinker Growth community. Being able to talk like that to your potential prospect, your potential customer, changes the game. Know what they care about. Be concise, be relevant, show them pictures, tell stories, not calculations, be as specific as possible. Use highlights, highs and lows. Don't be cumulative. If you're going to give a lot of examples, just try not to. Give the highs, give the lows. People actually, research indicates that when we're trying to build the when we're trying to build a wealth of information, like kind of make our point, people remember the high and the low experience. They don't remember the cumulative number of interactions that you had. They remember that time when you knocked it out of the park, the time when you didn't show up. They don't remember the 1,000 other conversations that you had. It's really, really interesting when we really think about how people operate. We are emotional creatures and we do that automatically based on almost no touch points externally. It's always the storyline in our own head. We need to understand that when we're thinking about communicating with others. Use real words. You're speaking to an audience. Speak to the audience, not necessarily to your coworkers. If you have got inside lingo or something like that that is super cool for your industry, that's neat. But unless you're trying to make the point that you're smarter than everybody else, just use real words. Use the 50-cent word. Use the cheap words. They're okay. This idea, if I this is a silly saying, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm going to do it anyhow. If you think of the average dumb person, and then figure 50% of people are dumber than that. Well, if that's true, and you want to impact the world, that's okay. Use the cheap words, just because you know the fancy ones. And I'm now at an age where I like forget my words all the time. I'm constantly fumbling over my words. The word just doesn't, it escapes me. And so all of a sudden the cheap words start coming out. Well, of course they should. You're communicating potentially with people who don't even speak English as a native language. Use the cheap words. Always low prices. Always. And lastly, here, reference outcomes and actions. Outcomes and actions. The idea with outcomes and actions is that if there have if there are going to be outcomes from the individual who's hearing a story, changing their belief, and taking an action, what's the outcome? Reference it. Hey, you're going to be happy when. You'll be sad if you don't. Again, cheap words. We've got this networking event. It's actually coming up tonight in the Thinker Growth community, and you can join for free. Go to thinkergrowth.com. But that networking group, you're going to make new friends. And who isn't going to be happier with new and better friends? There you go. You could meet a co-founder and start your business. It's all true information. We've got personal and professional development information and weekly Q&A with experts covering things like this. And if you think about it, this last 50 minutes of your time is so leveraged. It's just 50 minutes. It's less than an hour of your time. And you have learned, I'm certain of it, a handful of things that you can take into your business, into your community group, your church, your government, and change the way you communicate. In fact, we've got worksheets on this, and I'll be happy to take you through that whole workshop. It's a fantastic way to think about selling or influencing because every every time you get people together, they are writing a story that influences their belief, which means they're going to take action out of that belief, and then they are going to interact with their community and with you. If you're not getting the action that you want, if that interaction isn't going well because the action didn't go well, you have to figure out what they believe. But you can't stop there. You got to go with the story. What's the story that you're writing and how did that come about based on the other interactions that you've had? Now, story is automatic, it's necessary, it's based on our experience. It follows a predictable path which leads us to action. And if you're not experiencing the action that you want to take personally, because we have a story, or if you're not experiencing interactions that other people are taking with you, it is someplace in the touch points and the interactions which influence that story. So if you want to disrupt that, here's your keys. You got to figure out who your audience is. You need to know what action you want them to take. You need to know what belief exists and what belief I need to exist. What belief do I need to establish? Think about it that way. And to do that best, you got to figure out what you care about. Those emotional drivers of decisions. What do you care about? There's only a handful of things people care about, and it's universal. And so, what do I need to tell you, and how do I need to tell you it so that I can demonstrate a new story that will change your belief, which will influence your action, which will influence your interactions? And here's the reminder: you get to author that story. You are uniquely capable, responsible, accountable, actually, to author the story in a way that others cannot. You have a story maybe you want to tell. If you want to do that, we've got resources for you. You can get in contact with me. You can get in contact with Paul, or you can go to thinkergrowth.com. You can join do it even right now. Because for less than $20 a month, you're going to get all sorts of content just like this and weekly Q&A that will walk you through how to use this information very specifically for you. I'm so excited about the idea of storytelling and once I learned how to do that and I'm learning how to do that better, it really changes how we can communicate and how we put ourselves out there and how you build your personal brand and how you build your business. And if you need help doing that, again, join the Thinker Growth community. I would love to have you there. I know Paul would love to have you there. Naomi's there. She's our community manager, and she will be all over talking to you and getting you situated. Again, for less than $20 a month. If you have questions, I will see you next time. This, this has been the power of storytelling. How to use storytelling for your life, your business, and your community. Thanks for joining me.